Welcome everybody to our brand new format, the EU policy briefing. This is to keep you all updated on the new development at EU disability policy, and how these developments might affect you and impact your work. This is our first EU policy briefing of 2025. And each briefing will bring together updates from ENIL's policy team, outlining the recent developments, the action we have taken, and the outcomes we have seen, along with space for your questions and comments. So today we will hear from my colleagues, Ines Bulit-Kojakaru, our director, Rita Crespo-Fernandez, Human Rights Coordinator, and Florian Sanden, Policy Coordinator. And they will be covering three main topics. The review of the European Union by the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and its outcomes, how ENIL is fighting against segregation by reforming the EU budget as laid down in the Multiannual Financial Framework, and how ENIL is fighting against segregation by changing the way national authorities are allowed to use their resources, and how we are defending the right to legal capacity. We will finish with a Q&A session, so you have the opportunity to engage directly with our speakers. And with that, I will hand over to Ines for our first presentation. Ines will walk us through the main outcomes of the recent review of the EU by the CRPD committee. So Ines, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonella, and hello, everyone. Good to see you all here. Yes, first slide, Antonella, please. So I will talk a little bit about this is a big thing, a big development in the EU policy disability area. The end of the review by the CRPD Committee of the European Union. So we have foreseen 10 minutes for each update. So I will just give you some of our key thoughts and takeaways. Yeah, feel free to also put any thoughts or questions in the comments, and we can discuss a little bit after as well. This was the second and third combined review of the European Union by the committee. Just a little reminder that the CRPD, or the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, has been in force in the EU since January 2011. So this is over 14 years now that the EU ratified the convention. And the European Union is the only regional organization that is party to the UN Convention. The first review took place in 2015, so 10 years ago. And this review, in fact, lasted for several years. It started with the committee working on the list of issues prior to reporting in 2022, which were basically, it was a set of questions that the EU or the European Commission had to answer. And then the review finished in March this year, so a couple of months ago, with the concluding observations that were published by the committee. Concluding observations are, in fact, recommendations by the committee to the European Union on what it needs to do to implement the convention. Because the review refers to the EU as a whole. It refers to all EU institutions, including, for example, delegations of the EU abroad. But it's the European Commission that is in charge of coordinating all of this. So it was the European Commission that worked on their report, and it was the European Commission that, in fact, took part in the review in Geneva. Next slide, please, Antonella. Yes, so what is important to know? So the review of the European Union by the committee is a little bit different than the reviews of the individual countries. Because the European Union has certain competences. As opposed to its member states, right? So the competences means where the EU has powers to do something, where the EU can legislate, where the EU can enact policies, or where the EU can take some soft measures, right? And it is these areas where the European Union has competences, whether they're exclusive, so it's just the European Union, or shared with the member states, that are examined by the committee. And there was a lot of, before the review itself, there was a lot of discussion about these competences because it's not really clear cut, right? So us as the civil society, we say, oh, the European Union clearly has competence in this area. The European Commission will say, no, we have no competence in this area, or we have limited competence. And then the committee, which is composed mainly of people from outside, not just the European Union, but Europe, they are even more confused as to what is and what isn't the EU competence. So before the review itself, in March, the committee secretariat organized some training for the committee. So they had 2 trainings by the EU Fundamental Rights Agency to explain these competences, to explain what the EU can and cannot do. And ENIL as well, with validity, we had a little training for the committee about EU funding, both internally within the EU, but also in external action, to explain to the committee how EU funding works. And this is in itself a huge area. So it was a big job for the committee to review the European Union. The main rapporteur was Markus Schäfer, who is a member from Switzerland. He's a lawyer. But then also other committee members were involved from outside Europe. Also important, the committee was not just looking at what the European institutions are doing vis-a-vis the member states, but also how the European Union itself within the institutions is implementing the convention. So, for example, how they treat their staff members with disabilities, right? Or how accessible the EU institutions themselves are. And then, so this is what was examined. And then when it comes to the areas where, member states decide, those are part of the regular reviews, right? So these areas were not looked at by the committee. Now, the concluding observations by the committee are very important. First of all, they should provide sort of a blueprint, a roadmap, if you want, for the second part of the Disability Rights Strategy, 2021 to 2030. These actions still haven't been defined by the Commission. This is now in process. And during the review in Geneva, The representatives of the convention of the commission, so the commission delegation committed already during the dialogue to using the recommendations to inform the actions that will be part of the second part of the disability rights strategy. Now, whether this will happen, we will see, but this is what they said. In terms of the recommendations, the EU has basically until the next review to implement them, right? So they have quite a bit of time. But importantly, there are some urgent measures which they have to prioritize. And the committee will check, I believe, within a year or so how these are going. The committee singled out 3 areas that are urgent for implementation. This is the accessibility of the built environment, but also they mentioned, for example, web accessibility. So this is where the EU should take some urgent steps to improve. Then independent living, which is very good for us, obviously, as ENIL, because that's what we've been advocating for. Here I will explain in the next slides what the EU has to do. But the recommendations on independent living are probably the most extensive out of all the recommendations. So there's a lot in the recommendations on independent living. And this also has to be prioritized. And finally, there are urgent measures on international cooperation. And here the committee was most concerned that the EU does not really have a good plan for how to implement the CRPD in external action. It doesn't have a clear plan. It doesn't have a clear idea what it should do. So these are the 3 urgent measures. And finally, we have there are at least 7 years until the next report of the European Union, the combined 4th and 5th reports. However, this is likely to stretch even further. So this is mentioned in the observations as a date in principle, but it very much depends on the committee's workload and capacity. So it's possible that the next review will not happen, in the next 10 to 15 years even. Next slide, Antonella. I will focus on the recommendations that we have from the committee on Article 19. These are most important for ENIL. This is what we have advocated for in our shadow reports. We've had 2 shadow reports. We took part in the session in Geneva. We also took part in some preparatory work with the committee. And I can say that as ENIL, we can be very happy with how seriously the committee took our concerns and the recommendations they put forward, which to really a large extent reflect what we have been saying in our shadow reports. And I will just quickly go through them. As I said, there are really many recommendations related to Article 19. So first of all, the committee is asking the Commission to get rid of its legal service note from 2018. For those of you who have not been dealing with this legal service note, it was an internal note by the legal services of the Commission, which said that the member states are allowed to invest in institutions, to spend EU money on institutions in certain cases, and these cases were many cases. For example, if they can demonstrate that the institutions are good, if they can demonstrate that they are taking other actions. So the committee said, no, this has to go. The second is to ensure that no EU funding, including the Recovery and Resilience Facility, including funding for the neighborhood, so not just the EU member states, but also outside EU. Make sure that this funding is not used to build or maintain institutions including small group homes. Linked to that, the EU has to make sure that the coming cohesion policy legislation, so after 2027, explicitly prohibits the use of EU funding for the construction or maintenance of institutions. So you see, actually, these are not the only ones, but quite a few of the recommendations are in relation to the use of EU money. The next recommendation is that the disability strategy and the action plans that will follow out of that must comply with the General Comment 5. Here, the committee was concerned in how the EU interprets the convention, because the EU said in its report, basically, that they recognize that they are spending money on institutions, but they think it's fine. They think it's aligned with the CRPD. So the committee here wants the Commission to make it clear that they really understand what the CRPD requires. The EU should conduct and publish an impact analysis of previous funding with the involvement of civil society. This has never happened so far at all. So they should say what impact its funding had on disabled people. The committee also asked, this is not something that ENIL asked for, but the committee asked for the guidance on independent living, which was just published end of last year, to make it even more explicit that the EU is against investment in small group homes, and also to provide for redress and reparation to victims of institutionalization. This is not in the guidance at the moment. The committee also asked the EU to recognize institutionalization as a form of discrimination. Now, this would be very significant because the European Union, based on its treaties, does have powers in the area of discrimination. So it would allow the EU to tackle more the problem of institutionalization and to push more for deinstitutionalization. Next slide, Antonella. These are the recommendations continued. So the committee is asking the EU to strengthen monitoring and complaints mechanisms for allocation of EU funds, to improve the independence of the monitoring committees, and to ensure monitoring by the national human rights institutions like the ombudspeople and also disabled people's organizations. This was also one of ENIL's asks because this monitoring and complaint system doesn't work at the moment. The committee is also asking for access to justice by disabled people who have been affected by EU funds, so they can more easily go to national courts or the European Court of Justice and challenge how EU funds have been used, for example, to put them in an institution or not allow them to live independently. The committee is asking the EU to use its infringement procedure and other powers to sanction misuse of EU funds. This came up a lot during the review, during the dialogue between the committee and the Commission, where the committee was asking the EU, what have you done so far? What action have you taken? And the Commission could not really, had no answer. Because they, in fact, have not taken any action against the member states for investment of funds into institutions. And the final 3 points are more about, sort of positively looking, how to improve that funds really go into community-based services. And here the committee is asking the EU to adopt unambiguous definitions of community-based services, so that when the Commission says that it's investing into community-based services, it's clear what it is. So these are not small institutions, these are not daycare centers, these are not sheltered workshops, but these are really services that support independent living. The committee is also asking the EU to publish data about what services are being provided to disabled people thanks to EU funding. Because during the review, the Commission came up with some random figure of how much money they spent for community-based services, which was not based on any real evidence. And the final point is that the committee is asking the EU to prioritize investments into accessible and affordable housing, personal assistance, centers for independent living, peer support, and other types of individual support services. These are mentioned, this is all the language from the actual recommendations. So we are very happy this was mentioned explicitly to encourage, good investments. And the final slide, Antonella. This is just where you can find more information. So I would very much encourage, obviously, everyone to read the concluding observations in full. It's not such a very long paper. There is also still the recording of the dialogue between the EU delegation and the committee on the UN Web TV, which is very interesting, although it lasts probably 6 hours in total. But you can still watch it. And then finally, you can find the summary and analysis we have done with the Validity Foundation of not just Article 19, but also some other articles, comparing to what the work that we have done and what we've asked for and what the committee came up with. And we have a little video as well with a summary of these. So this is a little bit about the concluding observations. I'll pass back to Antonella. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions or discuss.
Thank you, Ines, for the presentation, and we can proceed with Rita now, whenever you want.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Antonella. So I will be talking now about redirecting funding by reforming the EU budget, as we are looking at the next EU budget in the coming years, or as it is called, the Multiannual Financial Framework, which is ending in 2027. Can you go to the next slide, please? We'll first talk about the current one to then talk about the next. There are a few positive things in this current EU budget, which lasts from 2021 to 2027. Also to say, first of all, there is 2,000 trillion euros allocated in this period, 2021 to 2027. This goes to many things. This is not only for EU funding, I mean, in terms of cohesion policy, it is also external action, the COVID-19 recovery money, it is a lot of different things together. And the other thing that is important to note is that this money has not been spent yet, mostly. It is still now in the process of being allocated because the last period was delayed. It is likely that this period may also be delayed, although it's not sure. But just to point out a few positive things from this current period. First, that there is a mention in the strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities regarding using this money for advancing efforts in institutionalization. There was also a guidance that came out as an initiative of the strategy, which Ines mentioned before. In the main regulation governing cohesion policy, which is the money that is supposed to equalize the territories in the European Union, this regulation is called the Common Provisions Regulation, and there is an enabling condition, which is the implementation of the UN CRPD. What this means is that in order to receive money from this cohesion policy, the countries need to be implementing the UN CRPD correctly. What is happening now is that all countries are considered to be fulfilling it at the moment. And also, there is in the regulations of the individual instruments, for example, here in the European Social Fund, the promotion of the transition from residential or institutional care to family and community-based care. In those funding that have these objectives, this is something that needs to be fulfilled also. This is called a thematic enabling condition. So these are the current things that we see as positive. However, what we are still seeing is that investments are planned towards institutions, and we have identified a number of specific investments into institutions. So we see that despite these changes, it is not too effective. Can you go to the next slide, Antonella? So now we are looking again at the next period, which is going to be 2028 to 2034. So that means that by 2028, we need to have new regulations. Even if the money is still not spent, by 2028, there needs to be new regulations to govern the next budget. What is the process? First, we're looking at the Commission released two important documents, which was the midterm review of the current budget and a communication on the road towards the next multi-annual financial framework. All these two documents are online and they were published in February. There was a public consultation that finished a few weeks ago on the Commission's website, and it was a consultation for anyone that wanted to provide input on the next budget. There was also a resolution from the European Parliament on the next budget. And by now, what needs to happen next is that there should be a proposal from the Commission, a formal proposal with outlining all of the ideas and rules for the new budget. This proposal will then be, and this is going to be the main thing happening in the next few years, in the next 3 years, is going to be the negotiations in the Parliament and the Council. And this is going to be what really takes time and what really is going to be a lot of discussion based on the proposal from the Commission. Can you go to the next slide, Antonella? ENIL, we published a position paper and we submitted our response to the public consultation. This is available online and I will later put a link on the chat. But the main recommendations I want to highlight from our position paper, first is that we need clear rules that say we cannot have investments in institutions, a very clear prohibition, and with stronger safeguards to avoid this. We see that this keeps happening despite having the enabling condition. So we need to make it really clear in the regulations, this cannot be happening. Then, and this is also based on what Ines was saying regarding the concluding observations, we need to be increasing investments for personal assistance, for centers for independent living, for affordable housing, for any centers, for any services that can support independent living. And this needs to be, of course, in the community. So here, the other thing to note is that there is going to be incentives for investments in housing. This is very important because the rules do not say what type of housing. But there's going to be strong investments in incentives for this. So this is something we're going to have to keep watch. It would be good that the regulation explicitly say that housing needs to be in the community. We want to maintain these enabling conditions. We want to make sure that there is still the obligation to adhere to the UNCRPD, to respect the UNCRPD when implementing EU funds. Now, what we would like is better assessment procedures. This was also in our recommendations, and it was also something that was mentioned in the concluding observations. Right now, it's mainly the member states that assess themselves. They are the ones that say, yes, we fulfill the conditions. We are completely fulfilling the CRPD. We want to have better assessment, and we want to make sure that civil society, that DPOs, that national human rights monitoring mechanisms are also involved in this assessment. Another thing coming from the concluding observations again is regarding the complaint system. Ines already mentioned the current complaint system doesn't work well. We submit complaints, nothing happens. So we need to make sure that there is a better follow-up after the complaints exist, and the Commission is able to take action when one of these complaints is submitted, and that there is better awareness, because one of the responses we get commonly after submitting a complaint is, actually, this is fine. We tell the Commission we know there is an investment in institution, and the Commission says, yeah, but it's fine. So we also need to make sure that there is better awareness in the Commission that this is a violation of human rights. The other thing is about the partnership principle. Currently, there is this code of conduct on partnership, and it is in the regulations that there needs to be, the partnership principle needs to be respected in the implementation of EU funds. This means that all of the partners involved in EU funding, this also means the beneficiaries, the civil society in the country, need to contribute to the implementation, to the planning, and to the monitoring of the funding. This is mainly done through the monitoring committees in the countries, which are in charge of this process. So this is something we want to stay in the regulation, but also to make sure that these processes are accessible and that there is targeted, that they target DPOs to make sure that they're involved in the process. And the last thing is regarding external funding. We provided some more specific recommendations, but just to say, we want to make sure that there is external funding that is dedicated for independent living, as at the moment, when we reviewed the EU funding that is given externally, we see that there is not enough investments into independent living, and that there are fortunately still investments into segregation. So we need to make sure that in the future this stops. Can you go to the next slide, please, Antonella? So what are our plans? Maybe also how can you get involved? As I said, we published this position paper. We will also we are in part of many networks and alliances regarding EU funding, so we're going to stay engaged, and any opportunity we have to give feedback or to work with others, we will jump on this opportunity. We will also, as I said, there's going to be basically 3 years of negotiations. So we're going to also ensure that we address decision makers directly, doing lobbying activities, probably addressing in particular the European Parliament, as the Council is quite difficult to influence. We will continue raising awareness. It's something that we have done for the past few years to raise awareness about the misuse of EU funds, and we will continue this work. And also, we would like to make sure that our members are engaged in the process. You can share messages, but you can also connect with us directly in terms of how, if you would like to influence at the country level, or if you also have knowledge of EU funds being misused or of good practices through EU funding. Of course, that is also very interesting for us to know. Can you go to the last slide? So yes, thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Rita. And now we go with the last presentation. So Florian, please go ahead.
Thanks, Antonella. So hi, I'm Florian, Policy Coordinator, and the CRPD concluding observations also have implications for some of the topics I'm working on, specifically state aid for inclusive employment and defending legal capacity. Next slide. First, what is state aid? State aid, in a nutshell, it's about subsidies paid by national authorities to companies' organizations if they threaten to disturb competition in the single market. It's an exclusive EU competence, and in this field, the EU can monitor, legislate, or enforce. Examples of why we need to ensure competition in the single market. The idea behind this is, for example, to prevent Germany or France from giving their car companies lots of money and then having an unfair advantage. And state aid is largely forbidden. Next slide. What did the CRPD say on this? So it gave a recommendation on UN CRPD Articles 27 on work and employment. Namely, the committee recommends that the European Union repeal legislation that allows public financing of segregated forms of employment for persons with disabilities, such as institutions and other segregated facilities. Repeal Article 34(2)(f) of the General Block Exemption Regulation and prohibit state aid of segregated employment. This is the only information I'm going to give. No, kidding. I'm going to explain now what this means. Next slide. Next slide. This is the previous slide, I think. Yes, thank you. So, services of general economic interest. What is this? EU state aid legislation, so on subsidies, national authority give to undertakings, foresees exemptions for certain type of products and services. They are called services of general economic interest, or CGIs. And these are clearly identified services meeting social needs as regards health and long-term care, childcare, access to and integration into the labor market, social housing, and the care and inclusion of vulnerable groups. And these includes services for disabled people. These services, under certain conditions, can get subsidies. However, and that's our problem with this, there is no mechanism to ensure UNCPD compliance at all. So the EU's mainstreaming obligations originating from the UNCPD are not being applied. Next slide. Thank you. For example, we have discovered cases of subsidies going to sheltered employment. Sweden is paying 500 million euros per year to the provider Samhall. I hope I pronounced this right. Belgium is planning to spend 30 million euros until 2030 to create 1,000 additional places in sheltered workshops. This is just Flandern specifically, so just the northern region of Belgium for those who are not from Belgium. And the Czech Republic spent 337.4 million euros on sheltered employment in 2021. So this is really a lot of money which is being spent here. Next slide, please. So then an important part of the regulatory landscape on state aid is the so-called General Block Exemption Regulation. It is essentially a list of products and services that are exempt from the restrictions on state aid, so they can be quite freely subsidized. And it includes a section on aid for disadvantaged workers and for workers with disabilities. And there's a list of things that can be that can receive financial support. For example, support to pay wages, work assistance, purchasing equipment, adjusting premises like renovations, rehabilitation, transport, and sheltered employment. So sheltered employment here is marked in red. There's a problem with this for numerous reasons. Next slide, please. So we are proposing to remove this article 34 to F. Well, under F, you see the detailed quote from the regulation. It says where the beneficiary provides sheltered employment, the costs of constructing, installing, or modernizing the production units of the undertaking concerned, and any costs of administration, transport, provided such costs result directly from employment of workers with disabilities. We are proposing to remove this, and you saw the enormous amounts of money being moved here. We observe that because so much money is going into sheltered employment, there's not enough money for all the other options, which are more effective, more helpful. Next slide. So why? We know also from studies that sheltered employment prevents rather than supports labor market inclusion. It is exploitative. In many countries, sheltered workshops actually produce products which are sold on the market. For example, in Germany, sheltered workshops produce spare parts for cars, which are sold to car companies. But in return, the workers only receive around 200 euros per month. So this is very exploitative. And it also creates a shortage of funding for the other more effective instruments. And I forgot to list here, this is a bit silly of me, it is against the UN CRPD. So the CRPD, it brought out a general comment in 2022, which said that sheltered employment is against the UN CRPD. Next slide, please. So here again, I circle back to the beginning of this part of my presentation. Now in its concluding observations, the CRPD, it supports our assessment that the EU has to use its competence in this area of state aid to make sure national authorities do not financially support services which segregate and exclude and exploit. And it supports our recommendation to repeal Article 34.2F of the General Block Exemption Regulation. That's the one I just mentioned. So we are very happy about this. Next slide. So, and there is a second topic I would like to cover. A second area where the CRPD asks for asking for report form. Sorry, I forgot one step in my presentation. It's not on the end yet. At the end yet. Of course, what are the next steps? We are now trying to lift this topic of mainstreaming UNCPD into state aid. We are trying to lift it onto the agenda. So we will have, as a first step, we will have an event in the European Parliament next month. Yeah, and now the second part of my presentation, it's about defending the right to legal capacity. And again, I start with the CRPD's recommendation. It is recommending to hold efforts to authorize EU member states to join or remain parties to the Hague Convention of 13 January 2000 on the international protection of adults, and do not proceed with the proposed regulation COM 2023-280 final, and do not proceed with the proposal Council decision COM 2023. Next slide, please. So, okay, we have a duplication here. I'm sorry for that. Next slide, please, Antonella. So what is what? What is the Hague Convention? What is the protection on the regulation of vulnerable adults? And what is the Council decision COM 2023-281? Next slide, please, Antonella. The 2000 Hague Convention on the protection of vulnerable adults is a convention from the area of private law, and it affects older and disabled people. And the objective is the simplification of cross-border recognition of legal capacity deprivation, for example, of guardianship, or taking charge of a person's property, or placing someone in an institution. The convention heavily emphasizes enforcement of measures. For example, you're placed under guardianship in country A, and your guardian places you in an institution in country B. So in such a situation, if you are the victim of this, there's nothing you can do. And this convention is making it very easy for this to be done. So it foresees automatic recognitions of such arrangements. Next slide, please. And with the regulation on the protection of adults and the Council decision I mentioned, the EU is aiming to implement this 2000 Hague Convention in the EU and all member states. It's a pre-UNCPD document, and some of the things, the content I just mentioned, is absolutely not in line with the UNCPD. The UNCPD says clearly there must be no guardianship, no taking charge, taking away a person's property, no deprivation of legal capacity whatsoever. So since January 2024, ENIL has been conducting an advocacy campaign to stop the ratification. Next slide, please, Antonella. So the objective of our campaign is to make this regulation UNCPD compliant. We want to get deprivation of legal capacity out and supported decision-making in. Supported decision-making implies that you decide if and when you want support in taking decisions, but you always remain legally in charge, and you can terminate the support whenever you want. Yeah, and to give an example, the regulation says in letter D, the designation, one of the measures foreseen is the designation and functions of any person or body having charge of the adult's person or property, representing or assisting the adult. Next slide, please. Yeah, and our objective, one of the things we're proposing, is to delete having charge of the adult's persons or property, and instead saying providing a support in decision-making to an adult in regard to property representation or other forms of assistance. yeah, one example. Next slide, please. Yeah, what have we been doing in the advocacy campaign? We have been involving lots of experts, like the CRPD sent a letter to the Commission. We have been involving the UN Special Rapporteur and a legal expert, Professor Degener. We have prepared joint amendments with a number of other organizations, and we sent them to many people in European Parliament and member state governments, basically to everyone who's in charge there, and we had also a lot of meetings. Next slide. Yeah, however, so far there has been very little consideration of our efforts from the side of the EU. They're very determined, obsessed with ratifying the Hague Convention, but they never show the same determination in ratifying the UN CRPD for some reason. Yeah, and so now the CRPD is supporting us. And I'm again circling back to the quote from the beginning. It's calling on the EU to hold efforts to authorize the ratification of the Hague Convention and also not proceed with the regulation and the Council decision. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, what now? Unfortunately, we don't have very high hope that the EU institutions will change their position significantly. There is a very small coalition of member states in the EU Council fighting for changes, but their success is minimal so far, and a lot of countries, also big countries like France, are resisting any change. Yeah, the Commission has been very stubborn too. Unfortunately, the Parliament is more readily to believe what the Commission is saying than what we are saying or what the UN are saying. So we don't have a high hope for changes, but maybe we are wrong. Let's see. Okay, next slide, Antonella. Yeah, thanks for listening. This is all from my side, and now you have time to ask questions.
Yeah, thank you, Florian, and thank you to Ines and Rita once again for these informative and important updates. So if anyone has any question or comment, you can raise your hand or type on the chat.
You can speak now or be forever silent. Not everyone at once, please.
If not, I can also have some questions, but first the participants maybe want to engage. No? So maybe I can go with a first question for Ines. I was wondering, how will ENIL be using the concluding observations?
Thanks, Antonella. The first step is going to be advocating for some concrete actions for the next disability rights strategy period. So as I mentioned, the next 5 years. So these consultations are now in progress. And now here we have some room to try to influence them. So we'll be using the concluding observations for that. As Rita mentioned, we are already using them for to try to influence the next multi-annual financial framework. And as Florian mentioned, of course, we are using them in these advocacy activities around state aid, around this vulnerable adult regulation. So basically, in all the work that we are doing, trying to influence different policy files or pieces of legislation, we will be using concluding observations. It's a good tool. But also it's very useful in terms of partnerships, with different organizations. So for example, we are working with the European Expert Group on the transition from institutional to community-based care. So here we are also trying to remind the other partners who are not all DPOs, they're, service providers, etc., that we have to use the concluding observation. So it's a very important, it's very important to kind of roadmap for us, let's say. So these are some of the ways. Of course, we are also internally, we are now going to be adopting our next strategic plan. So for us, also the concluding observations are a sort of, roadmap guidance on how we can, on what to focus on, basically, because here we have, with these recommendations, we have an extra tool to use, and we know that, we will not get the same recommendations for quite a long period of time. So yes, we might also be following up on some specific recommendations, like for example, on in terms of, as I mentioned, this legal opinion, legal service opinion. So we have a project on EU funds, and here we will try to specifically focus on getting rid of this opinion, so we will also take some specific recommendations to try to work on them. Also in respect to external action, we will get involved in that. But yes, we will, of course, we don't have capacity to work on all the recommendations, just to be clear, because there are so many. So we have to pick, what we focus on. Of course, Article 19, but also some other articles. And then for the rest, we leave it to other groups, other organizations, then to hopefully pick up on the other recommendations and to try to follow up on those. So that's, I hope that's clear.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left if someone else wants to ask questions. If not, I have another question and I will follow the order of the speakers. So, Rita? I have a question about the role of our members. So, what can ENIL members do if they know of EU funds that are going to finance institutions?
Yeah, thanks, Antonella. So, you can always get in touch with us. That's the first thing I would say. You can email me, you can email anybody at ENIL, and we can always discuss specifically if you hear of any investments in your country. What can you do would also depend on what funding we're talking about. Because if it would be the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the COVID-19 recovery money, it is very difficult to do much about it. We want to file a specific complaint grouping some of these investments, so it's good for us to know. But it is very difficult to challenge these investments. If we would be talking about cohesion policy, again, we could discuss it specifically, but there is a complaints mechanism to the Commission directly. And I would also say it is good to raise this in your own country. Either find out if there is some complaints mechanism at the monitoring committee of this specific fund, or at with the managing authority, or if there's anybody you could contact in the monitoring committee to raise this. And again, always good to raise visibility, to raise awareness, but we are here to help. I see it anyway, there's a hand raised, Lucas.
Yes, Lucas, you can go.
Hello. I was raising my hand because unfortunately I know dozens of examples of investing the EU funds in the institutions in Poland. Yes, Mm, and I am wondering in what form I shall give the information to ENIL. Shall I do some, let's say, list of these institutions, or shall I use the any specific form to inform you, to let you know about it? Please, could you please specify how should I do this?
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. We are now also doing a project that is focusing on this specific issue. So we will already do some complaints on Poland. So maybe it is good that you can send us as much information as you have. It's always good for us to have links. If you have links to the specific project, so we can get the project reference. Or if you have information you know yourself. But
Yes,
since we are already planning to file on Poland, it would be good to maybe group them.
I have the links because honestly these informations are fully public
Yeah.
because the local governments are even proud of having EU funds spending on these institutions.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. But as many links as you
Okay.
can send them, they're always useful. Then I can review the specific investments and see, since we are already planning to send a complaint on Poland specifically, it would be good to have as many examples as we can send
Okay.
to the commission. And
So,
then I can check which funds they are specifically.
even if I have, let's say, many examples, these are not too much, because the more you have, the more you can use. Am I
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Maybe then I might select one to develop more, but it's good to send a full list anyway
Okay.
to raise the attention of the commission, even if then there is one that, for example, you may know personally or that you know someone affected, even better. If you would know somebody that lives in an institution funded by the EU, this is even more pertinent. But as much information as we can get, the more information, the better, really.
Okay. Isn't an urgent thing to prepare such list? How many time do we have to do this?
There is no deadline. There is the one problem there is with the complaints. That is something we also told the commission in our feedback, is that they do not allow to take any action before the investment happens. So that means that before they spend the money, you cannot, they will not take any action,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is a huge problem. But it
Mhm.
is still good to tell them, even if
But
they tell us no.
but if the money will be already spent, you cannot do anything productive because it was
Yeah.
spent.
Yeah, absolutely. But the only thing they might do, which already would be good if they do it, is to not reimburse the government.
So
Yeah.
the money were spent, and we can only complain for it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
No, this is a huge issue actually, and we would like them to review this for the next period. Because yeah, by the time what they can do in the end is to not reimburse the country for
I'm
the money they allocated to this country for this investment. But yeah, the damage is done, indeed.
I'm
So
really upset.
you're not really
Mhm.
fixing anything.
I'm
But
really
we're still good to raise it, to give as much information as we can, because then if not, they can tell us, oh, but these investments do not happen. So it's still
Ah,
good that we tell the
okay.
commission. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I'm aware of it because
Yeah.
even during the Freedom Drive, Helena Daly said so.
Yes.
The EU funds isn't spent on the institutions at all. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, this was really disappointing.
she
Yeah.
was standing in front of us and telling us that.
Yeah. It's really
Bullshit.
frustrating for us as we have submitted complaints before. It's like,
Okay,
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
do you read them? But well.
Thank you very
Politicians
much.
don't always tell the truth, unfortunately.
Hopefully we don't have politicians. Thank you.
Thank you. And Florian, perhaps you also want to add something on the what can you do? So like what steps are being taken to communicate the CRPD concluding observation to the EU institutions and member states? And also how can the members contribute?
So after the concluding observations came out, we started adjusting our input to the second part of the EU disability strategy. We already had something prepared, of course, but now we are adjusting it, and there we will reconvey the CRPD's concluding observations. But of course, we will not just copy paste them. We will add many own proposals, and it's fair to say that we will recommend some strong action on all the areas presented here. And we are also planning to bring out recommendations to the Council presidency, which is the Danish presidency. Yeah, that's that. Even more important, how can you contribute? Basically, the same applies to state aid and legal capacity, what applies to EU funding. So we always need evidence, and what is very useful for us to have individual examples, personal examples. So, for example, if you use supported decision making and you benefit from this and you would like to talk about this, tell us, get in touch. If you know somebody or if you are deprived of your legal capacity, the same thing, get in touch with us if you're willing to talk about it. Or if you know somebody who is affected by either, ask them if they would be willing and maybe provide a contact. When it comes to subsidies for sheltered employment, the same. If you know somebody who's in a sheltered workshop and is feeling oppressed by it and would like to talk about it, ask them if they would like to get in touch, or if you personally yourself are affected, get in touch with us. Only, of course, if you're willing to talk. Or in your countries, if you know examples of authorities spending money on this, get in touch. But also if you have your positive examples, if you benefit from assistance at work, or you have an employer who's providing a positive environment, for example, and is investing of adapting premises. This is also helpful. So examples, yeah, this is really useful for us. Yeah, that's that.
Thank you. If there are, I see there's a comment in chat. Simon, is it worth talking to Spain about supported decision making, as they've made some very major changes, even changing the Spanish constitution? Plena inclusion played a big part in pushing for these changes. If someone wants to react, or
yeah, sure. Let's get in touch and discuss what you have in mind specifically, I would say. Yeah, that would be good. I also, if you are in Brussels, I would like to invite you to the event I mentioned. Give me a moment. Okay, I'm trying to post it in the chat. Go on, Antonella. I'm working on my post. This chat is not cooperating with me.
We can also share the information with the presentation. But yeah.
That is. I've just shared a link in the chat. If you are in Brussels and you want to know more about the whole state aid subsidization thing, we're having an event in the European Parliament on the 24th of June. Unfortunately, with the Parliament, it's very difficult to set up a hybrid event, so it's only in person. Sorry.
Okay, so we're concluding our briefing. Thank you so much to our speakers for these useful presentations, and to all of you for joining us today and sharing your questions or reflections. This is the first briefing, so we hope you like it and you will join us again for the next one. And as I mentioned, we will be sharing the presentation with participants. So if you have any follow-up questions or feedback on the session, feel free to reach out to us. And thanks again for being here, and we wish you a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Everyone, bye-bye.
Everyone.